We have been going through Old Testament texts that either foreshadowed Jesus or looked at Jesus or somehow are connected to Jesus. And today we're going to be looking at the sacrifice of Isaac that Abraham makes of Isaac, or is going to because God has asked him to. Just a little foreshadow, or part of what the story is about. You remember that Abraham was very old, and so was his wife, Sarah, and she was well past the age of having children. And God comes in the form of some angels, or God comes somehow to them in the form of three men, and tells Abraham that he's going to have a child by the next year when they come back. And Sarah laughs in the back of the tent. She's overhearing this conversation behind the tent flap. And come a year later, they actually have a child. And this is a child that God had promised that Abraham would be the father of many people. And so it starts Abraham. So there's this one child that they had late in life. And now God has asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son, the one that he's had late. I mean, this is horrible. And lots of scholars find this horrible. Lots of people find this story horrifying. We'll talk more about that at the end. But I want to read part of this story, and this is the part where Abraham and Isaac are headed with some wood up to make an altar up atop of a mountain. And this is a conversation they have. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them walked together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the fire and the wood," the boy said, "but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" "God will provide the sheep for the burnt offering, my son," Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up a knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Yes," Abraham replied, "here I am." "Don't lay a hand on the boy," the angel said. "Do not hurt him in any way. For now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son." Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it on the burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham named the place Yahweh Yireh, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use the name as a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. So, this is a horrible story here. Can you imagine what it was like for Isaac to be laying on this wood, tied down, and see your father with a knife ready to stab you? I mean, today we would call this child abuse. And it is, of course, would be child abuse. But the point of this story is that Abraham wasn't going to withhold anything from the Lord. Now, a lot of us have trouble even tithing to the Lord, 10% of what we have, much less giving God everything. And that's really the stance we should all be at, is it all belongs to God anyway, and so it's all the Lord's. Our children, our house, our money, our time, our possessions, our skills, all come from the Lord. But the neat thing about this is that it's a foreshadowing of what God himself will do for us, for sacrifice for our sins. He says, "You gave your son, your only son." Well, God isn't going to ask Abraham to do the sacrifice, but God himself will provide a sacrifice, his only son, for our sin. That's how serious our sin is. So it is an example God is showing of what God will do himself. Now, I said at the beginning that at the end we'll talk about what this passage may mean. Because in Abraham's day, there was a lot of human sacrifice. And from this point on, the and maybe even before, but the Jews realized that God was not asking for human sacrifice. This is sort of a watershed moment where the Israelite people realized that human sacrifice isn't what they should be about, but they should be about sacrificing animals. That God was asking that, and we can talk more about that later. But that was the impetus that really a lot of scholars think stopped Israel from even thinking about having human sacrifice, even though it was being done all around them. So that's a good thing. And while we find the story objectionable, it certainly led to a nation that didn't do human sacrifice ever again, or if they ever did do it, they didn't do it. They realized that this is not what God wanted. And it also shows a couple things for us, that everything belongs to God, everything is God's, and that God will do exactly what he was asking Abraham to do, and that is sacrifice his son for our sins. I hope you have a great day, and God bless you, and take care. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.